Hi YouTube, my name is Jack, and today we're going to talk about politico-theology and feminism and how those things show up in Wicca. Um, I did a video a while back about gender roles in Wicca, where I talked about the sort of strict gender roles that you will hear about in Gardnerian Wicca or similar traditions, where like women do X and men do Y, and ne'er the twain shall meet. And I talked about my perspective on that, which is that Wiccan ritual, I think, is structured around a partnership between two ritual roles, but that there is nothing inherent about the magic being done there that requires role A to be done by a woman and role B to be done by a man. I think that the magic is really in the partnership and is in the relationship between those two ritual roles, more so than it is in like something essential to womanhood and manhood. And this very like heteronormative biological essentialist vision of like the magic of the womb and the magic of the phallus must do energetic polarity to make the such and such happen. But in that video, I also highlighted that there still are good reasons for those roles to be assigned to women and men respectively. Those reasons just aren't necessarily magical, in my opinion. And the reasons are political reasons, politico-theological reasons, having to do with the importance of women and women's power in Wicca. Wicca is, at least as I understand it, a feminist religion. I think if you look at the writings of early Wiccans, and you look at what they had to say about the religion and what the religion was trying to do, what they conceived of Wicca as being about, one of the things that was really important to them was women occupying a place of power, women being empowered, women being the head of the cult. Gardner himself describes the cult as hypothetically being a survival of a matriarchal religion that goes back to prehistory, which obviously we know that that historical claim is not true, but nonetheless, this idea that women have primacy in the witch cult. The high priestess is the ruler of her coven, and especially in England in the early to mid 20th century, in a time when it's very difficult for women to acquire power of any kind in any domain, that's really a radical and important thing. And that's not really fundamentally a magical thing. That's not about like the magic won't work if, a man is the one calling the shots in the coven. Rather, it's about a political value that the people who were involved in the early days of Wicca shared, of trying to empower women, trying to give women a space where they could be in charge and could sort of have that expression, have that authority, and have a measure of equality that is otherwise absent from the world. I started to ramble, so we're going to cut and start over. I think paganism in general, and I've talked about this before, paganism likes to imagine that it is untouched by politics. There's a thing that people will often say that, like, politics shouldn't come up in the coven. You are with people that you share a deep religious and magical connection to, and that should transcend small political differences in a way that, like, you shouldn't be fighting with your coven mates about who they're voting for in the next primary or whatever. And, I understand the idea behind that, but it's also just fundamentally not true that religion is or can ever be untouched by politics, because religion is shaped by the same values that shape our politics. We have basic fundamental values. Those values lead us to make judgments about how we can best see them, manifested in the world, what actions we can take, what outcomes we're trying to pursue that would most align with our professed values. And that's how we develop our politics. And how we change our politics is when we come to realize, or often are told by sort of an outside party that we trust, like, hey, your views on this matter, the policies you support, or the action that you take, whatever, don't really align with the values that you claim to hold. And that cognitive dissonance, if we embrace it, if we allow ourselves to reflect and do some uncomfortable introspection, can lead us to adopt new political views, and that's how we grow as people. But those same basic values upon which we build our politics are also how we build our religious communities, because values shape the communities that we choose to interact with and how we choose to behave in them. And so the values that shape Wiccan ritual and Wiccan theology are political values. And I think, again, coming back down to one of the core values is this feminist ideal of women being given a space in which they can be powerful, in which they can be in charge, in which they can be respected and safe. And that's political. And it's okay that that's political, right? Political is not a dirty word. Political is about how people act together in communities. And religious communities are part of that. And I think that's really important to call out, because a lot of the things that we see in traditional Wicca, but also elsewhere in the pagan community or in religious communities more broadly, we think of them as deep, fundamental, ingrained theological things, and in fact they are political in their origin, and then the politics and the theology become intertwined and affect the choices that we make in ritual. So, pagans will sometimes say things like, no, there's no politics in the craft. It's just a self-evident natural truth that because woman is, or we're going to go with the 20th century kind of biological spin on this, because this is a version of the line that you'll hear a lot, but it's just a fundamental natural truth that because woman is the source of life, she has the authority and should be afforded a certain measure of respect and power. And that's a political judgment. It's a political judgment, A, about womanhood, about what it means to be a woman, B, about the connection between motherhood and authority in other communities. And it's okay that that's a political judgment, but it's important, I think, to recognize it as a political judgment that is informing our religious judgments. So when we say things like the high priestess is the one who's in charge of the coven because she is the representative of the goddess, and that's all good and legitimate and a reasonable part of what we're doing. But it's important for us to understand that there is politics present in how we are making those judgments and in how we are choosing to structure our religious community and our religious ritual. And that's particularly important because our politics change over time. But the values underlying the politics usually don't. I think that generally speaking, and I don't have empirical evidence to back this up, this is just Jack's views on the meaning of life, but I think that generally speaking, people's basic values remain pretty consistent across their lifetimes, and what changes is how they think they should act or they should participate in the world in order best to align with those values. And that's really important because our political understanding of feminism, of what it means for women to be empowered and to have access to authority and power, that has changed pretty drastically since the early days of the New Forest Coven. And, not everyone agrees on that. People have very different opinions on what that looks like. But in particular, a lot of second wave feminism really strongly emphasized the womb, emphasized the capacity for motherhood, and emphasized biological differences between cis women and cis men as a justification for the kind of power and the kind of space that women were claiming in certain branches of paganism. Right? So there was this idea that women are cyclical and intuitive and nurturing, whereas men are linear and rational and like aggressive. And therefore, because we live in a world that is dominated by patriarchy, which has too much of the linear, rational, aggressive, we need to counterbalance that by restoring the divine feminine to the world and allowing for this cyclical, nurturing, feminine, intuitive energy to balance out the masculine. And that was very much the line that you heard, particularly like from the 1970s on. And, you know, there's a certain kind of really deep appeal to that. Motherhood is a powerful thing. The menstrual cycle of cis women is a powerful thing. And it's legitimate for people to choose to find power in that. I know a Gardnerian priestess, and shout out to you if you're watching this, who is also a Thelemite. And she likes to say that, you know, she conducted a 9-month-long ritual through which she caused an entirely new entity to take physical manifestation in this world. And therefore, she's not really all that impressed by any dude's ability to, like, meditate for a couple of months and do the Abramelin. And, you know, it's funny and it's true. There is incredible magic in motherhood and in the mysteries of the body that has a womb, that menstruates, that lactates. Like, there's magic there and there's power there. And that's the power that we saw a lot of people choosing to claim in the back half of the 20th century. That was the way that we saw the fundamental feminist value of Wicca being expressed. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I think there are a lot of people who find power in that. And that's really, really important. To ramble again, so we're cutting again. This is going to be the most editing I've done on a video in a very long time. No, I think that narrative about goddess power comes from the womb, comes from the capacity for motherhood, and, you know, I, as a cis woman, worship the goddess because she has a womb like me, because she is a mother like me. That was very important and remains very important to a lot of people. And then what happened, and I mean, there were always people who were pushing back against this narrative, but it was really the dominant narrative that you would encounter for a very long time. But over time, we saw other narratives start to get introduced, because we saw people for whom that narrative didn't feel like an expression of the basic feminist value underlying the expression, right? You have the value, which is empowerment for women, and then you have the political and theological narrative that comes up as an expression of that value. And what happened was that a lot of people started to say, look, I share this value, but this doesn't resonate with me as an expression of it. You had a lot of cis women saying, look, I'm not a mother. I have no intention of being a mother. I have no desire to be a mother. And I don't particularly feel that my power is rooted in my womb. I don't particularly feel that my connection to the goddess comes from the fact that I menstruate. You had a lot of trans women who came in and said, look, I am a woman, but I am a trans woman. I don't have a womb. And my connection to the goddess isn't rooted in that. Or conversely, you had a lot of trans men who said, I was born with a womb, but I don't consider that essential. I don't consider that essentially something that makes me a woman. And if I'm worshiping the goddess, it's not because I have a womb, it's because of something else. And you had other political narratives born from the same feminist value underlying Wicca that started to populate and give people different ways of expressing political theology rooted in those same values. And I think that's also okay, right? There is nothing wrong with people who find meaning, find value and power in the narratives about the goddess and the womb and the ability to give birth, and like that's powerful stuff. That's really important stuff. And that is a part of feminism. That is a manifestation of that basic feminist value that is an integral part of the pagan community that is built on that value. But it's not the only part of it. It's not the only way of accessing that mystery. I think this comes back to the idea that politics can change and values don't. And I think especially when we talk about traditional Wicca, people, especially in the US, people get very tangled up in questions of what's really traditional, what is the traditional outlook on Wicca. And Wicca is ultimately a mystery religion. It's about your experience of the mysteries. And there are different mysteries for different people to explore. The values at the heart of Wicca don't change. Right? That value of feminist empowerment, if there were something that didn't value the empowerment of women, I personally would struggle to see it as part of the same Wicca that I'm practicing. But the way that that value manifests, the politics built on that value, can look a number of different ways. And there are priestesses I know who find great value in motherhood as part of their connection to the goddess, and there are priestesses I know who don't, and who don't consider anything having to do with motherhood or menstruation or that sort of whole biological narrative that was so popular in the late 20th century. There are priestesses who don't consider any of that an important part of how they connect to and understand the goddess. And I think as long as you are not excluding someone else's point of access to the mysteries, it's okay, right? If your personal connection to the goddess is ABC, that's great, and that's beautiful, and that's magical. You have the fundamental value, and then you have the politics that you build up based on that value. The problem comes when people say, well, no, this thing that I'm saying, this isn't politics, this is the fundamental basic theology of Wicca, and this is the way that Wicca has to be, and no one else is allowed to have a different narrative. Because the politics can change, and different people have different politics, and we are lying to ourselves when we say that there is no politics in Wicca, which is the thing that people say all the time. I understand the sentiment, I understand where it comes from, but it's a lie. There is no way for Wicca not to have politics in it, because Wicca is a community, and as soon as you have a community, you have politics. And I think it's just helpful to flag that, helpful to understand that a lot of the narratives that we have about what it means to be a woman and what it means for a woman to be empowered, those are political narratives. And they feed into our theology and our ritual practice. They feed into our understanding of what Wicca is. But different people are going to have different experiences and different narratives that connect them to the goddess through that fundamental value. All of this is saying, ultimately, people get caught up in a particular idea of how Wicca is supposed to look. And I think a lot of their ideas about how Wicca is supposed to look are born from political narratives that often don't get acknowledged as being political in nature. And when you let go of that, when you say, oh, this is the politics that I have based on these values that we share, but it's politics, and it's politics influencing my theology rather than just being pure natural theology that's, like unquestionable and untouchable. I think that leaves room for people to be a lot more open-minded. And I think, particularly when it comes to the inclusion of trans people in Wicca or same-sex anything, right? Anything having to do with gay people, like all of the queerness that we get in Wicca, suddenly becomes a lot more palatable to people for whom that feels scary and untraditional and like it's maybe a violation of the basic heteronormative and biologically essentialist theology that they were taught was intrinsic to Wicca. Once you understand that the basic heteronormative and biologically essentialist theology is not pure theology, but it's politics, coming from a good place, coming from a good value, but it's a political narrative built up that then influences the theology, I think it's a lot easier to let go of the heteronormative biological essentialist stuff and to be welcoming to queerness in the craft. And to let go of it, importantly, in a way that doesn't deny anyone's ability to access it, right? Like, again, if you have a womb and that's a source of power for you, good. Embrace that. That's fucking magical and fucking powerful. And you should be able to claim that power. But I think we can release the idea that that narrative is the only one, or that it's an inherent and essential one, through which people have to access the goddess. Because that is ultimately a political narrative and not the fundamental value upon which that aspect of Wicca is built. So these are just some thoughts for a Friday morning. I hope you've enjoyed. If you enjoy listening to me talk about this sort of thing, check out my book, Queen of All Witcheries, A Biography of the Goddess. This book is about the development of the goddess religions that we see in contemporary paganism and New Age movements today, some of the literary and historical, anthropological, as well as like religious and magical sources that we see contributing to that movement, and how our understanding of the goddess, of goddess religion, our ideas about how to worship the goddess have changed over the past 150 years, and how that sort of gives us perspective on how we know the goddess today. So I really love this book. It is my favorite of the books that I've written. I will never top it, which is unfortunate because I am going to keep writing books, and every book I write is just going to be inferior to this one. But please check it out. And if you do read it and you enjoy it, feel free to leave a review on Amazon. It really helps me out as an author. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you sometime soon.